And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Nikki Lee. Nikki leads the machine learning and responsible engineering education and the education evaluation assessment and research groups at Google, designing cutting-edge technical education and professional development programs in emerging technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and core skills like leadership and collaboration for professionals. This role builds on her years of strategic experience as a technology executive and leader in the finance and marketing sectors, as well as her time as a classroom teacher. Her passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion at all levels influences the global education programs Google delivers to both staff and the external community. Nikki, we are super excited to have you today, and I'm going to pass the floor over to you.
I hate that bio. It feels so inflated, but I actually need to take a moment to just express gratitude for all the work you've done facilitating all of this, Avery, and for ELB for having me do this talk, because it's actually really timely and appropriate, because I think the webinar style is an opportunity for us to really reevaluate what it means to do adaptive learning. So as we steal the screen sharing from Avery, Avery's going to do what I really, really appreciate about having a webinar facilitator is, as you all think through things, as questions pop up, Avery's going to be my other hand on deck, and she's going to monitor for questions, interrupt me, and she's going to be the second voice. So you don't actually just have to hear only me yap along. And like I was saying, how the bio feels a little elevated, it's a lot to live up to, just like the title of this talk. It's how Google tailors training for enhanced engagement and retention. And really, our goal is to go beyond just understanding, but really developing expertise, whether it's for our help center, whether it's for our technical writers, it's our software engineers, it's for everyone, including our internal staff and our external training, in doing all that. So let's see how we do this. We want to really start with a quick poll. What problems are you all as individuals solving on your team? Are you a learning designer? With our participants, we have 121 on this call now. Are you the ones creating trainings to up or reskill your learners? Or are you the learning sponsors? Are you the ones making decisions on what and how the organization trains learners? Or are you doing both of them? Are you making some of those decisions, none of those decisions, because you're in a totally different role? Or are you doing all of those things? That way I can tailor and adapt this talk on the fly a little bit. So let's take a moment, give a little bit of information so I can try and adapt this talk and take a little bit of a poll here. So for me, hosts and panelists can't vote. That's unfair. I'd like to bias this talk a little bit.
All right, Nikki, it looks like we have a pretty good response rate so far, so I'm going to go ahead and share those results.
Right, let's share those results and see what's happening. All right, we have a good mixture. So 32% of respondents, of which we had 91 people respond, 32% are saying that they are doing the ones to actually create the trainings. They're the ones who are going in and writing the content, possibly, and creating the e-learnings, writing the contents, or creating the slides or facilitating that. 12% of the 91 are the ones who are making the decisions. So they're the learning sponsors. They might be the program managers who are making decisions on what and how the organization trains learners. And then, as I suspected, 56% of us are doing some of those, none of us, or all of those things. And in L&D, a lot of us are switch hitters. We're doing a lot of combinatorial work in all of this. So I'd like to just do a little Q&A. Why are we going to bother going through the work of building adaptive training? What does it mean? What does adaptive training mean to you? And what do we think the benefit of taking this extra work to build adaptive training will actually be? That way we can talk about why Google's investing the time and energy to do that. So I'm curious on, on what your end, what are you thinking and what are you seeing? I think this is the challenge of a Q&A. So let's see what we got coming in on the chat. More visible value, build learner confidence, and everything. It's so interesting that we want to tie everything back to value. People need training that's relevant to them and their specific needs. Infuse more content into practice, modern updates to make it meet the needs of each individual learner. Tailor to the learner equals build confidence in real time. To show learners that we respect their time and their knowledge. Has unique needs. So what we're seeing is a lot about personalization. I can close this panel. Personalization, adaptation, recommendation, and etc. So for us, the goal is training, learning, and development that truly reflects the learner where they're at who they are at that given moment in time. I needed different training when I was early on in my career than where I am now, because my capacity, my time for learning was different. The skills I had and the skills I needed to learn were different. My approach to learning, my growth mindset was different. So really, for us, adaptive learning really means as the learner increases in skill, training content that changes to reflect that skill need. So that's what we mean when we adapt content. We're going to change the training to adapt to what the user actually needs at the moment. Personalized training is that the content is personalized to the individual's experience, skills, history. How is it unique to them? So there's a slight nuance in what we mean versus adaptive and personalized. And then recommended learning is training that is curated, scoped, sequenced based on my subject matter expertise. So we're going to bring in sales experts, the organization leads on what we think, we really think you need to do an upsell at this moment, and with the learner background, skills, and some predictive analysis that is going to happen at that time. And then on top of that, there's analyze, optimize, generate. So all of these things have a little bit of nuance. We're really going to focus on the first three today and why there's how we actually enable that with data.
Hey, Nikki, we actually do have a question that came through already. You may address this throughout your presentation, but I'm going to put it out there. Nick is asking, does the training actually enhance retention? If so, how do you achieve that measurement?
We see that because it is unique and specific, it does increase retention. Because why are you teaching me something that I already know? I'm going to breeze through that. How many of us are breezing through our compliance training and speed running it? I know I am guilty as a learning and design professional. I am guilty of trying to get through my code of conduct training as quickly as possible because I've done it every year and I'm not learning anything new. So by actually adapting it to what does she already know? What has she demonstrated? And what is new or what is specific to her? We're actually increasing retention and engagement with the material. We actually have a separate talk on how do we actually measure the increases in retention and engagement. And we can actually touch on that at the end a little bit when we have more time. So for us, what we do is we start with skills. So we actually already know we have our learning objectives. We've already done that. Some of us have it in the table of contents. We have it in the description, but actually being very intentional and deliberate of creating a skills graph where we keep it all in one place. It's not in, the description of all the separate learning interventions we have. And, some of it's in person and some of it's over here, but putting it all in one place allows us to mine that data and information so that we can then adapt and analyze it all together. So for us, it's a fundamental knowledge structure that can underpin all learning experiences and not just at Google, whether it is the external work that we do, whether we bring in some stuff from ELB or we have people do LinkedIn learning, or they read, they happen to read something from the Harvard Business Review. It's actually all combined together, and we store that all in one place. And so for us, that was really important that we actually align on what does a skill even mean? How do we define it? Because everyone's writing it a little bit differently. For us at Google, we actually had to really come together to be precise on what is a skill. A skill is a learnable, observable, and measurable behavior. Getting back to how do we know people are retaining this? How do we even measure whether or not this is making a difference and driving value back to the business? So for us, we had to define a skill as something that was learnable. A behavior can be acquired some way, observable. So can we see it? And is it measurable? And that was really important to us. And so for us, we want to express it as a verb-noun pair, the ability to verb the noun. So for us, the ability to build a treehouse, dance the foxtrot, play chess. But it gets into things that are very complex. We're talking about judgment, discernment. So it's just knowing how to do something, understanding that didn't cut it for us. So create a pivot table, code, select, implement something, empathize with the user. So one thing that I always talk about is scrambling eggs. Scrambling eggs is kind of basic, but scrambling eggs in a cooking class requires you decide how many eggs to buy, deciding how many eggs to buy, deciding what kind of eggs to buy, cracking the eggs, mixing the egg yolk and the egg white, cooking the eggs and serving the eggs. But even just the act of deciding how many eggs to buy requires you to know how many people are attending your event, knowing how many people are going to attend your event, knowing how. So there's an act of judgment in there. And so taking the time to really discern all of that is going to be key in doing that. So making a decision is more the active part of the judgment, consideration, and facilitation of something that is a little more ambiguous. And then we put it into a graph structure. Now, skills are contextual and relational. So scrambling eggs decomposes into multiple skills. And they're also, cracking an egg is also part of making an omelet. It's also part of, making a creme brulee. So these things all go into a graph structure. But it doesn't need to be a special software application. When we were piloting this, we actually started it in a spreadsheet, and it allowed us to analyze the data and analyze the data, because that data lets us be adaptive. The learners can know where they are, the organization can know what they're missing, and the designers know what they need to build, and analysts know where we can go next. Because once the data is there, we go, wow, all of our courses are teaching the same thing. Or we have a lot of courses teaching how to crack an egg, but no courses teaching how to mix the egg yolk and the egg white. So now you know what relationships you have between the skills and what courses are teaching them. Do you have a lot of coverage in some space, but not enough coverage in another? And now you're actually collecting all the data all together. And that is data that only you have. Your vendors don't have it. Your partners don't have it. What is unique to you? And that is why, unfortunately, this is an organization's discipline and rigor that needs to be put in place. And it's what opportunities are you missing that you already have? Adaptive learning really relies on integrating to the data you already have. You have objective data. Now that you have the skill data all in one place with what skills you have, what courses or materials or training you have teaching those skills, you can combine it with your objective data. What, your learners, what is their tenure? What role are they in? What team are they on? And then your training logs, have they registered for those courses? are they self-selecting for some courses and being required to attend other courses? Are they being, what courses are they waitlisting? That course seems really popular, but this really critical skill, no one's registering for that. What does that mean? Why is no one signing up for it? Do we need to reevaluate, how we're teaching that skill? And now we have a little bit of discipline and rigor in doing that. And then your completion logs, people vote with their feet. Are they not completing their training on a particular skill? And then your activity logs, are they demonstrating that skill? Now that we have it in a measurable and observable format, are they actually completing the upskill? Are they making the offer on the call? Because we, when I worked in a call center, we would Y-cord, and this is way back then, before we had all these AI tools, we would Y-cord with, someone during our training. So we would observe, yes, that person made an upsell on the phone to a potential customer, number of times. So are they demonstrating the particular skills that we want them to do? And so we can start to ask, are the people who are engaging in our training and in the adaptive training more likely to actually demonstrate the skills than the people who are not engaging in the training? And we have subjective data as well. So execs can go, what, this is the direction I think the business is moving. Here are the skills we think we need to develop. Or here's our company priorities. That's all data. It's subjective data, but it is useful to us to once we triangulate it against all the other data. And then we have subjective data from managers. What do they think a successful onboarding process looks like? So what do we think is necessary to onboard somebody? And then that is on the general business side. But then what about their individual evaluations of a person? So, hey, I actually thought that Nikki did a really great job at these particular skills, but Nikki thought she did a terrible job. And the activity logs and the skills demonstration said she was actually completing those skills. Why is there a deviation in Nikki's own self-confidence and her ability to do that? And so maybe something in the training was not supporting her in her confidence, despite her ability to succeed and her manager's evaluation of that. Or let's say Nikki really thinks that she's doing great, but there's not demonstration of it. So why is her confidence so high? And maybe that's an area for us to dig in by making those skills define the way that we are and triangulating all this together and combining it all. We can actually dig into that now. And so, the learners can express their desired growth. These are the areas I want to grow in. Here are the specific skills. And here's my self-evaluation of my abilities. So it's actually combining all of the data we have. It's that integration that actually lets us adapt to these individual users.
Hey, Nikki, we do have a couple more questions that have come through. Cheryl is asking, do you use an LXP to store all of this in one place?
In a perfect world, an LXP would be a way to do that. It actually requires what we call a learning data warehouse, which would have different data structures for the skills. We actually call it the skill stack plus our learner activity plus our HR API that would then combine into an LXP. But it's actually not required to do that. And that's actually what I get into the next slide is you can actually start really small. You can start with a form where you ask for feedback. Tell me about yourself. If you don't have access to the automated data on what role they're in and what they're doing and what their goals are, you can just ask them and use that as a starting place to grow into adaptive learning.
Awesome, thank you. And actually 2 more questions came in sort of about what you just talked about. Nick was asking, how do you verify that someone has a skill? Specifically, what if they say they What if it is a skill that they do not need in their current role, but need for a future role? So they don't necessarily have the opportunity to demonstrate it in their day-to-day. And then Dahlia is asking, how do you scale collecting subjective information?
The scalability question is one that we all battle, and I think is really challenging. So we start with, a pilot program to test, is this really valid? Is this useful? And is this something that we can use to see results in? And so, we'll start with a Google form, or, if you use Qualtrics or some other form info, we start there. And I think it is about the consistent deployment of that repeatedly. So the way that we do that is rolling that out to a small group. And for us, I would say a few hundred is still reliably useful in collecting that data via a form. But it's the way that you do the data processing in scaling that's where the scalability increases. So it is about the discipline in the way that you create your forms and phrase your forms, and collecting that subjective info is where it's going to be key. So it is, can you use your AI processing to parse open text? That's going to be handy. So that's called text classification. Or if you want to use an LLM, if you have that I don't find reliable enough now. But it's for all of your, what team are you on? Don't let them put that in an open text form. Put it into a what we call an enumerated form, either a checkbox or a dropdown. That way you can create a workflow, and that's entirely possible in Google Forms and in Google Sheets, and which we are required to, but definitely in Microsoft Teams and Excel is all possible. You just have to be very, very disciplined and rigorous in how you set that up. And that is what powers a lot of what we do, is these workflows that we create. And then how do you verify that someone has a skill? I think there's different levels of verification. It is that you start with, I self-attest, and then I then start demonstrating. And then there are opportunities to demonstrate that you have a skill, even though it is not in your current work requirements to do that. So there's opportunities outside of your work ones. So let's say I'm a salesperson, but I'm looking to transfer it into marketing. There are portfolio projects, there are sample projects that I can use to demonstrate it in different ways. That's within Google. That might require a larger culture shift within your company of, well, I'm not demonstrating it in my job, but what are side projects I can do? What are other ways that I can show and attest that I have that skill? And it's, for me, what are the risks of, how do I go back? There we go, of doing that. So actually, I'm going to get back to the slide really fast. I'm going to close this Q&A panel to go, how can you all do adaptive learning? Because for us, the recommendation is get access to as much information you can, but don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You can just ask them, for the information yourself. Start with, what do you want to learn? And use that feedback to change how you do an e-learning. Incorporate, say, what are your goals? Have them fill it out, and then use your e-learning software to say, oh, your goal was this. Did you achieve it? That's a tiny bit of adaptive learning where you're using metacognition. So that's a tiny bit of opportunity to start right there, where you're taking their feedback and incorporating it in. Or, okay, you said that this was your role. You can build a custom workflow. Adaptive learning can start out looking like a BuzzFeed quiz or a choose your own adventure, where you are only creating 3 or 4 custom, 3 or 4 trainings or versions of trainings, but you create a little flow chart at the beginning where they fill out their individual qualities, and based on that, it filters them into one of the four. As long as it starts to look like you're taking into consideration of their individual characteristics, you can start to give that feedback back to them. Oh, you were fed into this version based on these characteristics that you gave us information on, that you were on this team, that you've been in this role for this long. Based on this information, we recommended this back to you. That's a really just great start. A research study we did on YouTube, you see all those videos that it recommends to you based on the video that you're watching. Before, we had really precise videos, really precise recommendations based on your activity. And we would see that you would watch longer and more, but people actually really didn't like it. And we were getting really bad feedback on that. And what we saw was there was higher engagement and higher satisfaction when it says, oh, we're recommending this to you based on these reasons. And we told them why we were recommending this video to them. And we saw higher retention and higher engagement and higher satisfaction, which was a key factor in doing all this. So letting them know, hey, this is why this is being recommended to you, or this is how we are adapting it back to you. A key thing is intentionally building, if you're doing in-person training, intentionally building it into your facilitator training. So letting your facilitators know, take the time to adjust what you're doing in the room and supporting your facilitators in doing that. So giving them the skills to teach them how to be adaptive in the training. I know a lot of us rely on volunteer time. We don't have paid facilitators. We're relying on our subject matter experts or people who are volunteering their time to facilitate learning for us. So, building it into our facilitator training and giving them those skills to teach them how to be adaptive. Now, with machine learning coming onto the scene and AI coming onto the scene, you can use the new tools to gain perspective, efficiencies, or help you adapt to the team. If you don't have the tools or the vendors to build custom adaptive tooling for you. So as you start to build, you build one training, go, hey, suggest changes to this training based on another persona. So you can write a little snippet and go, okay, suggest edits to this snippet if it were to be adapted to another persona. So you can gain those efficiencies. So you write it once and get the ChatGPT, Gemini, other tools to suggest different versions of it based on the other profiles that you now have the data to know exist within your company and within your organization. And for me, the biggest opportunity with adaptive learning is getting feedback. We have a phrase that if you cannot build something about us without us. We cannot build a teacher training, a training for teachers without asking the teachers. So not about us without us. Above all else, we want to avoid creating or reinforcing systems of unfair bias in doing all of this. So the whole point of building adaptive training is that it's so custom, so adaptive to who you are in that exact moment. It is reflective of you as much as possible. And the more data we get, the more custom we can make it. It is unique to your situation and is reflective back of you. So that is the goal. And we don't want to make this about an individual without their feedback. It is a very intense feedback loop, and we want to understand how it is doing and getting all of that back. So I want to take this opportunity to get as many questions in as possible. I know, I know we have a lot of opportunity here. It feels really messy. It feels like it's a lot to do. It requires a lot of technology. It requires a lot of data. But really, I want to encourage everyone to start really small and really, oh, well, what if I take an existing training I have and just put a quiz at the beginning of it, and then just change the ending of the training I have based on what the survey quiz at the beginning said. So that is a way to test whether even doing a tiny bit of adaptive learning is more effective. And that way you can start to build the case with your organization that investing in adaptive learning is worth it. And thinking about using skills as a way to then be the connective tissue that lets you measure whether or not it is driving value, measure whether or not it is actively working and actively making a difference. Because now you can see, oh, for the control group who took the non-adaptive version of this, they performed this way. And then the experiment group who took the slightly adaptive version of it, they performed better in these ways. Avery, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do have a question. Okay, what kinds of advice should we give trainers to enable in-person adaptation? Our trainer base is very used to old-fashioned presentation styles. How do we inch them towards interactive adaptive sessions?
Oh boy, do I know that. We went from a series, Google's onboarding. So this is, every company has to have an onboarding session in doing that. And this is, we went into the deep end of adaptive probably too quickly and without doing the necessary change management. And this is just a little bit of a lesson learned. We went from a 1 week onboarding where we flew everyone to Google and from around the world. And it was a series of just lectures. You got in front, it was the sage on the stage, and you had someone come up and they gave you a lecture on why testing is important at Google. And then you had another one and you had another one. And we went away from that to project-based learning. And it was fully adaptive. You went into a specific team based on your role, your prior to Google experience. So if you were a new grad, you went onto a team with other new grads, etc. And it created ripples through it. We had VPs screaming at us, and they were so angry because they were affirmed by being an expert. They were affirmed by standing there, and they were really upset by that. And what we didn't do is we didn't take the time to do a slow transition. And so by having that time to transition, what we should have done is really go, hey, we're going to take these people who are doing presentations, give them new versions of the presentations where we build in poll questions. We build in, if the audience is mostly composed with this, we're going to slightly alter the presentation in this way. Where if the audience mostly answers B, do this. So slowly introducing new skills that they were not prepared for. Before, they went through a presentation linearly and then transition to, okay, there's 4 pathways that this presentation can go. And then from there, introducing slightly new skills and then transitioning to, okay, now at the end of this, you're going to do an introduction and now there will be a project. And so really not telling them that they have a, adaptation, never using that word and telling them that they need to adapt and introduce adaptive learning. Just saying, here's a new presentation. Here's here's the new presentation that you're going to do. And based on the results of this, here's how the presentation is going to change and seeing how that goes. And really relying on, we're just testing it. We're just testing it. We're going to see what happens. And if you don't, and if it doesn't work for the learners, we can go back. But really, the thing is we have a very strong hypothesis that it is going to work. And really, we should be humble enough to experiment and see if it doesn't work, why it's not working. You got anything else for me, Avery?
Yeah, let's address this question. What are some ways I can do adaptive learning with the tools and data that I already have?
Yeah. So one thing that we saw really creatively, because, this was a little while ago, Google doesn't readily invest in L&D. We have to be scrappy. We have to prove a business case to it before they'll give us money, which feels like every single company. So what we did is really creatively, I saw someone where the first thing that they did was take a Google form where what they did know was who was attending it was a virtual instructor-led course, and they didn't know who was attending. So they were able to send a Google form to them, and they asked, okay, what are your goals? What team are you on? What is happening? And then based on that response, they created a branching slide deck. And that was the e-learning that was delivered. So you would click on different parts of the slide deck, and it would jump you from slide 4 to slide 237. That was a lot of work, but based on how you interacted with it, you were able to jump around, and it was truly so creative in how they were able to use a standard piece of company issued tooling to create something. And now, ideally, you have e-learning tools. You have e-learning tools that are much more scalable than you having to use Google Slides. But even then, thinking, if you remember your Choose Your Own Adventures book, do you go left or do you go right? If you go left, go to page 627. If you go right, go flip to page 2. And thinking of that like branching analysis, it is complex, but based on your individual's responses to what they are learning or what they are demonstrating, if they get the question right in an assessment, if a customer comes in yelling at you and they want you to do X, Y, and Z, what do you do? And you give them 3 options. Based on the options that they select, direct them to different places. That is truly adaptive. The training is changing based on what they responded. Great, they get it right, send them to the next section. So, yep, you got it right. You don't need to continue on. But if they get it wrong, reinforce it. Send them to another scenario. If they get it really wrong, go back to another fundamental skill. And so there's a way to work within the existing tooling you have to do adaptive without having to bring in anything else. Because what is key and critical that no vendor can support you in, that no one can do, is that you have access to your data and your learners. If that sounds too cumbersome, that's where a really great like bringing in partners or bringing in custom external software to help you will be assistive.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all that, Nikki. Looks like we are just about nearing the end. Is there any last remarks you want to leave our audience with before I close this out?
I know that's a lot to take in. What I really wanted the walk away I want everyone to do is try and get your hands on as much information as possible, because you have access to more than you realize. You have access to more data than you realize. It's just not obvious sometimes. And sometimes it's a matter of just asking your learners for that information, or it's a matter of it's in ugly formats, it's in spreadsheets, or that the HR team has it, or the sales team has it, or the IT team has it. And you should just be trying to integrate that as much as possible. And people forget that learning is really at the crossroads of all those different divisions. And so trying to integrate that is how you're actually going to be able to enable adaptive learning as much as possible. I have an upcoming talk, thanks to ELB, about measurement. So we can dig into what does it actually mean to observe and measure, empathize. I can actually really break that down for you in that talk, but it is actually how do we actually measure and understand, like, how do we measure and know that this is driving value? But happy to chat more, answer your questions via my email, or and dig into this. But I am so grateful that ELB has been a wonderful thought partner to me in all this and was able to bring me in. I really am so grateful, in particular to Kristen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nikki. This was super informative. There's lots of kudos in the chat. It was so great having you here.